Hey folks, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're joining us from for this new episode of the Rise Up Radio. And today I have a very, very special guest with me on this episode. So her name is Shonna Waters. Shonna, very, very warm welcome to you on the Rise Up Radio today.
Thanks so much for having me on Rise Up Radio.
It's all our pleasure. So, folks, Shauna is the CEO and co-founder at Fractional Insights, where she helps organizations to design, work, and use people technology to optimize and align business and people strategy together. It's a very, very heavy lifting work. Shauna, we're going to talk more about it. But she's also an author, speaker, a lifelong learner, and a contributor to the field of organizational psychology. So, Shauna, why don't you take us through your profile a little bit, your work that you're doing, and whatever you've done in the past to share a little bit of that with our audience today?
Absolutely. I'm happy to. Well, thank you again for having me here. And as you said, I'm an organizational psychologist by training. So I got my doctorate in IO psychology about 25 years ago. So it's been a little while. And really, if you think about, if you're not familiar with the field, psychologists study people to understand, predict,
Mhm.
explain, and manipulate behavior. Organizational psychologists do that in the workplace.
Yeah.
So that's really, we study both the individual side and the organizational side of work. So I started my career as an external consultant in a kind of boutique research-oriented consulting firm, doing everything from designing decision-making
Hmm.
systems for the military and government and private sector organizations to really helping them figure out how to make those decisions in practice, in context well. So organizational effectiveness, organizational design, even things like providing feedback to executives and making sure that they can implement that feedback. Then I went internal. So I worked in a mid-sized government agency leading HR transformation,
Okay.
performance management, rewards and recognition, really everything that touched people in the
Mhm.
organization. I led research at SHRM, and then I went into the technology sector where I worked for a little startup called BetterUp
Mhm.
from about Series A through Series E, and I left a couple years ago to start Fractional Insights. So it's a bit of my journey, but I'm also an executive coach, and as you said, I teach at primarily Georgetown University.
Awesome. Well, you know what? One word really caught my attention, and that's the topic for today, which is context, right? And we often talk about learning in organizations. We often talk about coaching. We often talk about skill building. But typically, when you look at the history of learning and development, I think one of the biggest misses in that has always been the context, the individual context as well as the organizational context. And that's exactly what we are going to talk today. Now, you've worked across IS psychology, org transformation, and now you run your own firm. So, what made you shift your focus from individual level learning, first of all, and then going into development initiatives across the entire organization, keeping the context in mind?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the seeds for it were probably planted very early in that I
Okay.
actually went into psychology because I was always really interested in this fundamental question of nature versus nurture.
Hmm.
So I have three siblings, two of them are adopted. And
Okay.
I was always really fascinated by the fact that it was not necessarily my biological sibling who was most like my parents.
Mhm.
So I was just really interested in that question. So I started on the biology side and then switched into psychology,
Wow. Okay.
at some point during undergraduate. So I started in molecular genetics, very different.
Wow.
Um, but but I can see that in hindsight. It
Hmm.
was not always obvious to me in the
Hmm.
moment. But the moment where I did really notice it was when I made that shift from external consulting to internal consulting. I
Hmm.
noticed things like we could design the best tool in the world, the most
Yeah.
scientifically valid, and it still wouldn't get used, right?
Great.
Or I could coach a leader
Yeah.
and see incredible transformational progress,
Yeah.
and they would either end up reverting back to old behavior or
Yeah.
leaving the organization because the organization hadn't changed alongside them.
Right.
And so that's really where, I settled into this, what I call the first principle, which is that the
Mm.
environment determines the outcome more powerfully than the
Mm.
individual attributes. Context shapes behavior. We know that when we walk into an
Correct.
elevator and we all face the same way,
Correct.
right?
Correct. Correct. Absolutely. So, you mentioned that you have seen firsthand where, an incredible individual transformation still didn't result into, performance or continued, work, contextual transformation. What happened? Can you give us an example of specific organizational context that prevented that real change from happening?
Yeah, absolutely. So one that comes to mind just from this week is that I've been
As
working with
fresh off the press.
fresh off the press. Exactly. Exactly. I've been working with a leader, an executive in a high growth organization. And one of the coaching goals has been around communication, right? So, really trying to up level the influence of him and his function by working on communication skills up and out. So this is something we've been diving deeply into, everything from looking at his personality profile and trying to connect it to, things that are helping or maybe getting in the way related to that goal, looking at the activities that he's actually engaging in, right?
Hmm.
But as we track progress throughout the conversation, the reality is that there's your zone of influence, what you can
Hmm.
actually control.
Correct.
There's what you can help influence, and then there's the things that are just out of your control because
Correct.
they're bigger than you are.
Correct. Correct.
And so the sticking point that we're finding is that there's a whole governance system that is both defining what information comes to him,
Hmm.
but also what are the structure systems processes that
Hmm.
help him get information out to
Yeah.
others.
Right.
So again, that doesn't mean that you don't have power and control. We
Hmm.
all do, but it's really understanding that there are limits to
Yeah.
what we as any one individual can
Correct.
do.
Correct. Correct. And those variables become very important for you to understand and navigate, for you to be successful, especially at senior roles. Correct.
Absolutely.
So let's break down this word context. I know we're talking of context, but we haven't defined what context is, right? And typically, I would probably break it down into two parts: the individual context and an organizational context. How do you define context? And if you also divide them into two different parts, what would that constitute typically? You did hint a few things here and there on the individual context. I know that. But for our audience, let's lay it down in black and white.
Yeah. Well, I like to talk about organizational physics. So these are like, we talk about gravity, right? And that's something that just exists
Yeah.
in our environment, whether we want to acknowledge it or not. And there's some physics in organizations or in our context that do the same thing. So one is scale. So it's what's the mass or the magnitude
Hmm.
of of the context that we're in, and that's things like the size of the workforce and, the second is hierarchy. So, what is the structure that shapes authority and information pathways? Third is power.
Hmm.
So, what's the individual of, or the ability of individuals or units to actually mobilize resources and influence
Right.
outcomes?
Right.
Fourth is information flow. So
Mm-hmm.
speed and accuracy that data decisions and feedback are circulating
Mm-hmm.
in the context.
Mm-hmm.
And then the last is resource constraints.
Hmm.
So these are limits on your time, on your capital, on your attention that really create these like
Correct.
trade-offs and
Correct.
equilibria.
Correct.
So all of that is happening in the context. And then there's the things that, our managers and our policies and everything
Hmm.
are determining. So some of that is things like culture.
Yeah.
What's the level of support in the
Yeah.
context in
Yeah.
alignment with the goals you're trying to pursue?
Right. Right.
Um, Trust, as I mentioned, resources,
Hmm.
structure, culture, rewards, incentives. peer support, So all of those things are part of the context, some of them more visible than others.
Yeah,
And to your point, I think it's things that, we're often very focused on measuring and managing the individual, but we forget that there's
great.
all this ether that has so much potential.
And everything that you mentioned, Shona, and I was wondering as you were speaking, right, is so intangible. Nothing is documented, on this front, and nothing that is documented ever happens. It's actually mostly the opposite that actually happens. So how do you navigate, especially when you're trying to effectuate change at a scale in an organization? Okay, it's easier to work with an individual on a one-on-one basis to understand what their context is, what their constraints are, what their boundaries are, and try to help them navigate that. But how do you make that transformation at scale in an organization, let's say 5,000 people, 10,000 people, where there's so many unsaid nuances? Is it humanly even possible? Yes or no?
Hmm. That's a great question. Well, I know that you and I are both fans of technology and how
We
it
are.
can how it can help with these things. But yeah, so one of the things I will always name my biases where I can, and one of my
Hmm.
biases is in measurement.
Okay.
So my doctoral minor was in statistics, and as I said, I've spent a lot of my career trying to figure out how to make
Yeah.
help people make better decisions. And a lot of
Right.
that
Right.
is exactly what you're saying. How do we make the invisible visible?
Correct.
Because we can't change what we can't see.
Correct.
So it really is in, understanding like what are these factors that may matter, and then
Hmm.
how do we use structured measurement, unstructured measurement, technology to help us identify these patterns
Hmm.
so that we can work with them more intentionally.
Yeah. And once you do that, then it's a matter of deploying systems which can help individuals, understand their own context and then work towards it, isn't it?
Yes, so we refer to this at Fractional Insights as performance engineering. And
Right.
that that's really just this idea that, exactly what we're talking about.
Yeah.
We can treat performance in an organization as an engineering
Hmm.
problem,
Hmm.
where, again, once we understand what the components are,
Yeah.
we can design with intentionality. And so, I think this notion of yeah, being able to take it, see it, work with it, we
Hmm.
do that by three levers: strategy, systems, and support. So it starts with really, where are we going? What are we trying to achieve? What does good look like? Aligning people around that, then
Hmm.
designing
Hmm.
through this performance engineering
Yeah.
process, this like,
Right.
how do we make all those components we've talked
Right.
about line up,
Right.
work in congruence with it. And then the third is support. And that's really the leadership and workforce enablement and transformation.
Awesome. Awesome. Cool. Let's shift our focus to a very important cog in the organizational wheel, which is typically the managers, right? Right now, if you look at organizations, typically managers are the stakeholders who are trying to make sense of all this alignment for their teams,
Yeah,
isn't it?
tough job.
It's a tough job. First of all, they have to get aligned and then they have to make the teams aligned, right? How do you see managers' role in all this, and more so evolving as we are heading towards a new age of organization, which might even include, let's say, AI workers, in the workplace. So how you see that changing?
Yeah. It's such a good question, and one that I am wrestling with every day in the work that we do. So there's a lot of different points of view on this, but I'll share mine with humility. But I believe that this has always been true, but it's even more true now, that managers and leaders have to be architects of trust. At the end of the day, organizations are social systems, not technical systems. And what that means is that trust is really the glue and the currency with which work gets done. So what trust requires is credibility, integrity, and benevolence. So credibility is, do you have the capabilities
Right.
to help us accomplish our goals? Integrity is the say-do gap. right? Can I predict what your behavior is going
Mm,
to be? I feel much
mm.
safer if it's
Yep.
predictable, which is
Yep.
problematic these days. And then the third is benevolence. Do you actually have my best interests at heart?
Mm,
So, whether you're talking about needing someone to take a risk or a leap, which is true with any change, with any innovation, with any transformation, especially one like AI, which
mm.
is threatening all of our core universal human needs
Right.
for security, growth, and significance, I need to trust you. I need to
Mm,
believe that you're going to take me better than somewhere where I've been.
right.
And these are fundamentally relational tasks.
Mm,
So you're right that there's this sense making that's really important, both because people are overwhelmed and we need focus,
great.
but also the sense making and the storytelling on where is it that we're going,
True.
right? And that helps me both in terms of making sure that I'm going to the same place
Right.
that you are, but also again that it's going to motivate me to get through the hard stuff, the
True.
extra energy that
True.
it's going to
True.
take to make the change.
Yeah, that makes managers' role even harder, right? As we go into the future, it becomes even more difficult because it's gonna be more software oriented rather than the task oriented nature that we've seen in the past, mostly.
Absolutely. And I'm curious, what you're seeing here too. But
Hmm.
one of the biggest challenges I see right now with
Hmm.
leaders is that situation that you're talking about, where it's like, yeah, this is a lot of pressure. There's a lot of relational stuff. And And most managers don't want to lie to their employees.
Right.
They don't want to say something that might not turn out to be true. And so
Correct.
they end up getting frozen, right? So
True.
they either say things that feel good, even if they're not accurate, and creating that integrity challenge,
Yeah.
or they don't say anything at all,
They deflect.
right?
Yeah.
And what do people do in the absence of information?
No, absolutely. I think that's one of the biggest challenges that you see, especially in the first-time managers and middle managers layer, typically, right? When they don't get proper information themselves, they don't have enough inputs to be able to guide their teams better, and that's where a lot of times they fail as managers because, and they end up resorting to task management instead of relationship building because they themselves haven't been able to form those bonds with their superiors and seniors to be able to get that flow of information and then percolate that down to the bottom. Yeah, it's very challenging. I think as we go on, organizations have to realize that the roles of managers are changing. I think more and more and I'm talking to whichever organization right now, right? Most of the leading organizations right now are trying to collapse the hierarchical structures as much as possible, so
Mhm.
that the flow of information is faster. There is more exposure of the bottom layer ICs to the senior level, and that even makes the softer skills at the IC level more important because your actions and your communication patterns need to be spot on because you're not only interacting with your manager but even the n plus 1, n plus 2, and n plus 3, and n plus 3 could be already a CXO, right? So because of the flattening hierarchies, I think that change is very much on the anvil, and it's happening as we speak.
Absolutely. And I think there are things that are inherent in that we haven't yet named and reckoned with. So, for example, there's a phenomenon we refer to as altitude
Hmm.
sickness,
Hmm.
which is essentially this gap in
Yeah.
perspective that we get the higher people move in the
Right.
organization. So you can think about this as, the view looks very different from the plane window than it does on the ground.
Correct.
And we know that.
Yeah.
And yet it's easy to forget.
Correct.
And
Especially when you
so
come from that level only, right? Because you forget what was at
exactly.
the ground level before coming to 50,000 feet level. When you're at 50,000 feet, you forget how the ground looked like, right? So I think,
Yeah. And there's a reverse of that too, which
True,
is
true.
that, why do individual contributors have such a hard time with
Right,
executive communication?
right.
Well, they don't yet have visibility
Yeah,
into what the day-to-day and what the decision-making paradigm, information flow is for
yeah.
those people, right? So there's this challenge in perspective, and the reality is that both of those views are critical.
True.
All of them are critical. And so part of the job to be done, and this is where contextual engineering
Hmm.
can help as well, is reducing the friction or the barriers that help that
Right.
prevent those
Right,
perspectives from
right,
merging.
right. So let's say that you see an organization where you see a lot of these frictions happening, right? What typical symptoms would you see? Now, there are obviously the obvious ones. Attrition rates might be higher, right? Or maybe the company might be missing their objectives as frequently. But are there more subtle nuances in play when you see an organization struggling? What should you start watching out for? For example, if you were to talk to an L&D person or a CHRO or a CEO even, what signs should they start observing for to see that their organization might be silently suffering from these conflicts?
Well, I think you nailed it in terms of there's two key categories I see. One is what we refer to as the strategy execution gap. So whether it's your sales numbers or your product deliveries, y- you're not achieving your strategic goals and objectives. Every business problem is a people problem, and every people problem is a context problem, right? So identifying a pain point in execution
Yeah,
will inevitably get you to something in that value chain that is off.
right, right.
Alternatively, you may see it show up in the people problems directly.
Hmm, hmm.
So a CHRO, for example, is often paying a lot of attention to those metrics, but a
Correct,
business leader might notice it on the
correct,
execution side
correct,
first.
correct, correct.
So either way, I find that those are the pains that lead us to do deeper root cause analysis
Hmm.
that end up coming back to the kinds of things that we've been talking about.
Makes sense. Absolutely makes sense. So, Shauna, let's take context into picture and let's talk about one of the topics that we talk a lot about, which is leadership development, right? Now, we talked about managers, we talked about leaders, we talked about their development as people leaders and people managers. When you start to taking context into picture, how would you redesign the typical leadership development programs, especially keeping all these contextual inputs at the center of it?
Yeah. Well, it's a good question. And so we have the approach that we tend to take is first of all helping people to understand that starting premise that organizations are social systems. And when you view it as a system, things start to look a little bit different.
Mhm.
We also start with really teaching managers and leaders about what we call the universal need triad, which is, this is basic human motivation, right?
Mhm.
Like 97% of people are looking to work to meet their core
Right.
needs for security, growth, and significance.
Yep.
When those needs aren't met, you get angst, right?
Totally.
People get nervous.
Correct.
That creates drag on
Yep.
the organization. And so, what we try to do is equip people with this toolkit that helps them really address those needs and align them. Those are the human needs. What are
Hmm.
the organizational needs?
Hmm.
How do we bring those things into alignment? And to do that, you have to even have the view of
Right.
looking at what's happening in the organization
Hmm.
through that lens. So we call that psychological ergonomics, which is really just the idea that, we design our physical workspaces so that we
Mhm.
don't get backaches and,
Yep.
that our wrists aren't hurt. How do we do the same thing with our psychological
Psychological
workspace?
workplaces. Yeah, I know. And nobody pays attention to it, by the way. I mean, you join an organization, you just start working in it, and without even thinking, you just get subsumed into how, things get done without even designing this very critical piece. I think that's a solid one.
Now, Ashish, I'm curious. I know that you all are working with AI coaching
Yeah.
and how to use that in this problem space. Tell me, I'd love to understand a little bit more about how you're
Oh,
approaching it.
absolutely. I think for us, everything is exactly what you said, which is helping an individual trying to make sense of the context that they're working in, right? A lot of times, what happens is that the learning programs that they typically go through, or like you said, a person joins an organization and you start working in, right? You get a bunch of training programs which might be helpful to you, and the core word is might, right? You're not even certain or sure that they're going to help you or not. And for us, that's basically a no-no. And we're saying that, hey, billions of dollars are being spent on learning and development programs. They have to provide a better ROI to organizations than what they're doing. And for us, I think the biggest missing piece of the puzzle is the context, both individual level context and the organizational context. And for us, we believe that AI is the solution to be able to implement this contextualized learning at scale. Now, an individual coach or a human being can work with a bunch of people and make this beautifully, executable on for them. But how do you do it for, let's say, 5,000 people in an organization?
Mm.
That's where I think scale, comes through AI, which is able to understand your individual context as an individual. What's your personality type? What type of people are you working with? What challenges do you face in the organization? What's the employee engagement or culture data looking like? Anything that's measurable, the coach can ingest that and make sense of it for you and help you navigate, your world within your realm. The way you were saying, right? The way you work individually is what our AI coach tries to do with individual managers and ICs specifically.
Very cool. Yeah, what I like about that is, we've been really emphasizing personalization for a long
Very,
time
very long
now.
time.
And personalization is great and it's so powerful. And then you realize, and I think, HR and L&D leaders have realized this for a while, but not had the right tools to deal with it, that if you have everyone who has such a personalized set of knowledge, experience, all of that, it becomes very hard to coordinate action
Absolutely.
because there's no common
There's
sense.
no common sense, right? If you and I go through the same program, we might take away totally different things out of it. And
Right.
out of the 100% that we'll consume, only 10 or 15% might be useful for each one of us. On the contrary, we should be consuming or we should be getting support, which is at least 80 to 90% contextualized to what we are facing at the moment. And it should be totally different to what you need or what I need in an organization. It might be in a same role, peers working together with each other, just with one special parameter, which is, our personality types are different. Just one parameter makes it so different. And then there's so many other parameters at play in an organization.
Yeah. Yeah, I really like that. I mean, I do think that the magic happens in getting that right balance
True.
between
True.
personalization and shared.
Correct, correct. And you're absolutely right. I think it's not only about personalization anymore, it's more about contextualization. So personalization, you still can do that. Okay, hey, one video is being shown to you and me, and AI is changing that video for me and for you as well. But contextualization takes into pieces like 50 different data sources, combines it, connects all the dots for me as an individual, and then helps me, right? That
Yeah.
is the transformational level of AI at play, which we are starting to see now. And, in the coming years, we're definitely going to see more and more of it.
Well, it's funny, there's something that's a little bit meta in all of
Hmm.
this as we talk
Hmm.
about the role of AI and how it
Yeah,
can help us navigate individuals and context, which is that one thing I've noticed about our mass interaction with
yeah,
AI and
yeah.
adoption is that working with it in and of itself has, I think, retaught us the importance of context
Correct,
because we can see real time how much better
correct.
the answers
How much
get
better
the
it
more
becomes, right?
context you
Exactly.
provide. Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. So yeah, that's a wonderful example that you just quoted. I think we are automatically learning that context makes it even better. So yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, awesome. Shauna, this was a great conversation. I personally loved it so much, and I'm sure our audience is gonna love it as well. Your contact and your LinkedIn is gonna be there for the audience
Great.
to connect. And folks, please feel free to connect with her to understand more about context or any support that you might need to understand organizational context in more detail. Shauna, thank you so much for coming on this episode with us. It was a pleasure having you with us today.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for the fun this morning, and I look forward to listening to the rest of the episodes.
Absolutely. All right, folks. Well, there you have it. This was today's episode, and I'll see you with a new guest in a new episode. But till then, you folks take care and be safe. Bye bye.